Hello everyone, I'm Mrs. Sherman. Welcome to Homemaking Radio. I hope that you are doing well in your present circumstances, but that you have great plans for its improvement. And today I'm speaking from one of the rooms in the manse, and I have a few subjects I'd like to cover today. First, let's get ready. I call that your prep. Go and bathe and dress and get everything fixed up, your hair fixed up, and make your list and get ready for the day. The list is the most important thing because it will be your guide if you can actually make yourself obey it. There's my problem. But if I have it on the list, at least it's in my mind, and writing produces thinking. So writing it down is really important for focusing and stabilizing the mind, I think. Now that's just my opinion, and anything that I say here, don't go follow me. Check it out, see if it turns out to be true, and if it's going to work for you. And so also, I've been discussing a few things in previous videos that I've been interested in recently for some reason. I guess because my grandchildren are getting older now, and they're in their 20s, and some of them teenagers, and so I have been doing some of the interesting things about their future and discussed some courtship things and read from Stepping Heavenward by Mrs. Prentice from the 1800s because it deals with people that age. And so, but before I get started on some of those today, I am going to suggest that after you get dressed that you make a list and you go around your house, do a walk through, and just kind of walk through, because the walking and the movement can settle your mind and maybe balance your thinking a little bit, and look around and see what needs to be done, and that way you can include it on your list. So go through, and the things that need to be done the worst are, of course, as I have mentioned before, your areas like your kitchen, your bathroom, and your laundry room, which I call them the wet areas because that's where the water is and where a lot of the things that need to be cleaned up are in. And so those will have to be done every day, or at least gone through and tidied up. And so, but before too long, I need to read this, and it is from the Tea with Jane Austen book by Kim Wilson. When I first got this, I wasn't very interested in it, and then I started to look at it really carefully, and tea, the effect that tea had on people. Now today we have so many different kinds of teas, and they're not all like from the camellia plant. Some of them are called tisanes or herbals or something like that, and you can make a tea out of anything. You can even put a berry in a cup of water and you've got yourself a tea. You squeeze a little lemon in some water and you've got yourself a tea. So what we call tea these days can be just about anything, and I've become quite a tea hoarder, and have a big box full of tea, different kinds of tea. And so during our ladies' Bible class every week, I always let them each pick out a bag of tea and try it out while I present the lesson, and they just love that so much. And I had heard about somebody back in long time ago in the U.S. who had come to America from some other country, and he taught a class to earn a living. He had a little, I don't know exactly what it was he taught. Maybe it was language or people that adjusted to English or something like that. But during that time, he served a tea from his country, and people were served this tea in his class. And so I thought, well, I didn't know that until after I started doing that. So it must be a natural instinct to do that. And my daughter would get tea ready of some kind that maybe represented a country or just, I don't know what else, when she would read from old history books. And she didn't buy the school curriculum type history books for homeschool. She went ahead and went to antique stores and got books on antiquities with old maps in them, and they weren't really history academic type books. They were just records of things that happened. And so she read those aloud to her children. And consequently, one of her children likes tea and likes history. So she made it pleasant for them. So I'm going to read from her book, Kim Wilson's book. And it's various things that she covers. She covers tea for oppressed heroines. Let me just read a quote. The old woman pressed her to take something. It's about Jane Austen books, and so she quotes a lot of Jane Austen and other authors. The old woman pressed her to take something till she at length consented to take 1 cup of tea, which was brought. Maria, now finding herself alone, gave vent to her feelings. And, there have been times when we have been somewhere, and these days I'm finding reasons to stay home more and realize that I did not have to always subject myself to being, quote, somewhere else, but maybe thought that I had to, or I was expected to be there, and thinking of what a great thing the home is, because you can get things just like you like them and you can have your tea. And so many times I was at someone's house, and I was thinking way back in the 60s or 70s, and they would offer us something. They'd offer us a cold drink or something, but it was always some kind of soft drink, like I'm trying to think of what to say without mentioning a brand, but it was just any kind of fizzy drink and always very sugary. And if they had anything else, it would have been coffee, but never tea. And I was thinking how nice that would have been to have had communion over tea, because when you commune with one another, you talk to each other and you're taking tea, it seems to soften takes the edge off of everything, and whereas some of these other drinks, not so much. And so I have been staying home more, and if someone comes over, I always offer them, I let them pick out what kind of tea they want and what kind of teacup they want, and make it a happy time for them. And if they don't like tea, well, I have other things too. But I want to read Spiritual Refreshment and Inspiration from Kim Wilson's book, Taking Tea with Jane Austen. That's what it looks like, Tea with Jane Austen. Now, there are 2 of these books, and one of them is by a different author, and she has Tea with Jane Austen, has a lot of recipes in it, but no pictures. This one has a lot of nice pictures in it. Jane Austen understood well the refreshing, comforting qualities of tea in Sense and Sensibility. And by the way, I'm reading to you so that you can get something done while you listen. Now, I listen to audiobooks. I must say, I found some pretty good ones. Some of them even start out with a scripture. A lot of them are Regency type, written by modern authors of that era, Jane Austen-y type of, inspired, by Jane Austen type of audiobooks. And I also listen to history audiobooks and other things online. I usually find them on YouTube. Jane Austen understood well the refreshing, comforting value of qualities of tea in Sense and Sensibility. When Marianne Dashwood barely survives a dangerous illness, her sister Eleanor, who has watched and nursed her through the crisis, turns with relief to tea. If you watch the 1990s edition of Sense and Sensibility, they're very careful to follow most of the script in the book, and everyone had their eye on those teacups to make sure that they were from that era, or they were similar. And we watched the steam in the teacup in North and South, with Margaret handing tea to Mr. I can't even think what his name is. Mr. Thornton, was it? And found it fascinating that they were able to make that cup of tea be so real. And so at 7 o'clock, leaving Marianne still sweetly asleep, she joined Mrs. Jennings in the drawing room to tea. Of breakfast she had been kept by her fears, and of dinner by their sudden reverse, from eating much, and the present refreshment, therefore, with such feelings of content as she brought to it was particularly welcome. Yes, I have had people come sometimes to the ladies' Bible class, and we always have kind of a luncheon tea afterwards around a little round table, and some that had never experienced it before will say that it brought them such peace, because the first thing that I say is, let's just block out the world. Let's just block out the world. And what we do here right now is more important than anything that you will hear on the news, any world calamity, any sale, anything else, any pressing responsibilities that you have. And they'll all say that it did them good. And many of them are saying now that they're practicing this during the week, stopping in the middle of the day for tea. Now, it won't do you any good if you're stopping to drink tea and then listening to all the news. And I would encourage you each to write a diary or a newsletter where you put news that you like in it, news of your family and of your home and good things in it. Because what is news? It's supposed to represent north, east, west, and south, something like that, and spells news. And who said that it has to be what is perpetrated on us daily and squishes our minds up so bad that our feelings feel so tight and we can't function because of the fear and the worry. And they're always going to do that. They're always going to have something to make you frightened of. So they keep you in a constant state of upheaval and of fear. Tea was useful in cases of emotional distress as well. In Northanger Abbey, that was one of the least interesting to me of the Jane Austen books, but my daughter just loved it and her friends just loved it. And it's growing on me a little bit. I'm learning a little bit more about it. Just seemed so much darker and more serious, but you could see as you read it Jane Austen's disgust at the way some people acted, and you could see what her values really were through this particular story. Catherine Morland is sent home abruptly from the dreadful General Tilney's house. The first thing her mother does, noticing Catherine's pale and jaded looks. A jaded look is just somebody who has dulled in life and they've hardened in a way, and they've seen too much of the dark side of life. The first thing her mother does, noticing Catherine's pale and jaded looks, is to order tea for her. I'm getting to make a lot of friendships with caregivers, and this caregiving lady that I know, whose daughter works side by side with her and is taking care of their grandfather. The caregiving lady says she takes a cup of tea to her daughter every day before she's completely woken her out of bed, and sets it somewhere in her room and leaves. And so her daughter gets a cup. What more does she think she can do? But I just thought that was marvelous and a great example. And one day, her daughter will say, "My mother did such and such." What a wonderful thing. Not that we all have the energy for that, but I just thought I would bring that up because she said that upon returning at home, first thing the mother does is she orders tea for her. I suppose she rang a little bell and one of their hired servants came along and with the tea. In Mansfield Park, Fanny Price, returning home after an exhausting journey, is grateful for the tea prepared by her thoughtful sister. I wish I could ring a bell and they'd just bring me tea right now. What I really like is to have a tea bag and a pot of hot tea or some kind of container with hot tea, and then I can just make it into the strength that I like, and that each cup is hot and not sitting in the teapot too long. Fanny's spirit was as much refreshed as her body. Her head and heart were soon the better for such well-timed kindness. Oh, how little credit we give to the act of having tea. Tea could also assist literary inspiration. One of Jane Austen's favorite authors, Samuel Johnson. I've told you about Samuel Johnson, and the book that I was the most familiar with was Boswell's Life of Johnson. And apparently Johnson was an interesting character with a lot of handicaps, but made the best of it in his life. And didn't have, the perfect father or mother or anything, but somehow made the best of life because of it. And I'd like to know more about it. But he was the one apparently that wrote the first English dictionary and a lot of other things. But also, there's a quote here by him that everyone loves. Tea could also assist literary inspiration. One of Jane's favorite authors, Samuel Johnson, her dear Dr. Johnson, as she called him, was completely mad about tea, brilliant and wickedly amusing. He described himself as a hardened and shameless tea drinker who has for 20 years diluted his meals with only the infusion of this fascinating plant, whose kettle has scarcely time to cool, who with tea amuses the evening, with tea solaces the midnight, and with tea welcomes the morning. Samuel Johnson and Jane Austen were both brilliant writers, and they both loved tea. Do you think I'll ever be a famous, brilliant writer? Well, this can't hurt to try the tea and see if it helps. A mere coincidence? I think not. And then she goes on to say, and if you've got something to do, I hope you'll do it while you're listening. Tea with that little something extra. If tea by itself didn't provide enough refreshment and inspiration, this I have read to you previously, so I'm going to just move on to something else here. And it's called Tea at the End of the Day. The end of the day in Jane Austen's era. Now, I've read to you about that in Brian Kozlowski's book, The Jane Austen Diet, because he was able to glean from all of her novels and of the Regency era the habits of people before the industrial times, when people had so much automation and their work hours changed. And he mentioned that in the evening started after 4 o'clock. And people just started to slow down, and it was pleasant, and they wound down. And unfortunately, in our era, after 4 o'clock, everybody starts listening to the news or checking it, and then they get stiff and unhappy. And the only way to relieve it sometimes is other things that aren't good for them, that just create more of a problem. And he mentioned that after 4 o'clock, people started to slow down and often were in bed by the time it was dark. And I've been trying that, and I believe I feel so much better. The only problem with it is you wake up so early, and it's rather strange if you're not used to it. You do wake up early, but I think that it's doing me good. We shall see, and I am a scientist, and I'm the experiment. So we shall see if this early to bed and early to rise is any good. But I think it would have put a lot of parents in a lot better mood. Most parents say that they don't get enough sleep, but I thought maybe instead of giving the children naps where they wake up so late after a nap, that it'd be better that they all went to bed really early, including the parents. So the gentlemen returned home when their business was done, and the ladies left off their work around the house, and they met for dinner, then assembled later in the drawing room. Now, it was called the drawing room because it was considered the withdrawing room, where you withdrew and went and sat somewhere. We call it the lounge, the living room, the front room, the common room. They withdrew and assembled later in the drawing room to take tea and spend the evening entertaining one another. Now, back in the day, I would say probably around the 70s, you would eat dinner and then have tea at the table with your dessert. But I think this is a great idea. Let's go to the withdrawing room and have our tea there. And I suppose that was what the little tables were for, the little coffee table and other things. I don't have a coffee table because at the manse the room is quite small and I just needed a little more space, so I just bring up some little round tables that I can move around if anyone needs to have tea. But I think it's such a great idea. I just might do that. And so might start a new a new habit. We are going to go on a cruise. I have not told you about that. This cruise will take place in the manse, and the whole house will be somewhat decorated as though it were a cruise ship, and the outside will have a deck, which is the front porch, and we're going to do cruisy things, and we will have tea in the lounge room, and we will have we'll have a play, we will have activities, we'll have many things that are done on a family cruise. So we are going to really enjoy this. And that reminded me of what I was reading here. So the gentlemen returned home when their business was done, and the ladies left off their work around the house. They met for dinner, then assembled later in the drawing room to take tea and spend the evening entertaining one another. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have tea on the ship in the drawing room. I don't know if you've ever done anything like that, but we also have crafts. You know, when I did the train, we had crafts where you could make a train. We also did a play, and everyone had a part in the play, and I'll probably make up a story, or we'll find one in an old book, a story that we just turn into a play. Tea provided an excuse to come together and socialize. Jane Austen's Dear Dr. Johnson called tea a pretense for assembling to prattle, for interrupting business, or diversifying idleness. They who drank 1 cup and they who drank 20 are equally punctual in preparing or partaking of it. They are brought together not by the tea, but by the tea table. Yes. At what time people took their evening tea was a matter of personal preference. Because it generally followed the end of dinner by 1 or 2 hours, tea time depended on when dinner was eaten. I was very sad to notice that in other places where I have lived, where they did practice having that later tea time before bedtime, that it was no longer done. And I think a lot of it is that the women, of course, left the home and went to work in business and were not home. If they were home for it, it was getting ready for the next day, and they just didn't have the leisure time to prepare it. At what time people took their evening tea was a matter of personal preference. Because it generally followed the end of dinner by 1 or 2 hours, tea time depended on when dinner was eaten. When Jane Austen's parents were young, dining in the early to middle afternoon was usual. People of fashion, to distinguish themselves from the common folk, dined later, perhaps 3 or 4 o'clock. Naturally, aspiring ladies and gentlemen changed their hours to imitate high society, which responded by pushing the dinner hour even later. A little dance ensued in upper classes, and the stylish retreating from the dreadful fate of being thought common, and the would-be fashionable following as fast as they could. By the Regency period, the modish were dining at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, or later. Especially in the countryside, the old-fashioned and those with no pretensions to fashion continued to keep early dinner hours. I really agree with the early dinner hours. If you have children, feed them early in the evening before they start getting unhappy, irritable. Start to feed them early, because it helps you with your temperament as a parent, not to wait, just because it's 6 o'clock. If it's 4 o'clock, feed them at 4 o'clock. In Pride and Prejudice, Bingley's snobbish sisters, who have a horror of anything vulgar or provincial, no doubt set the dinner hour at 6:30 at their brother's house. The Bennets dined some 2 hours earlier, a practice that must add to the contempt of the sisters. And I wonder sometimes if it was because of the daylight. Those who were a little bit wealthier could probably afford to light the fuel for candles and lanterns, and maybe the poorer needed to eat earlier because of that. In 1798, Jane jokingly wrote to Cassandra, who was staying at their wealthy brother's house, "We dine now at 3:30, and have done dinner, I suppose, before you begin. We drink tea at 6:30. I love that, 6:30. Sounds better than 6:30. "I am afraid you will despise us." But in 1808 she noted that we never dine now till 5, an almost stylish hour, though I doubt it would have been seen as impressive by the Bingley sisters. I'll stop reading that now, and if you've got anything else you need to do, you can start pretty soon. I had been reading Stepping Heavenward because it was the story of a young girl and all the problems that she had trying to refine her character and develop her character. And it is rather painful sometimes, because I remember myself also attempting at a very young age, wanting to know, okay, what can I do that is right, and then failing at it, or finding out it wasn't the right thing to do, or something like that. And so it's really nice if, when you're growing up, or if you're a mother, if you could take your children through just create an etiquette class yourself, and think of the things that, maybe mistakes that you made, of what is the right and the wrong thing to do as far as courtesy, being courteous to one another. And it's not so much about etiquette as it's just about being kind and loving to each other and to yourself. And it would be very beneficial, because that way we don't turn our children out into a crowd of other people, maybe at in some kind of institution, and just leave them on their own to make all those mistakes. Yes, you can learn from mistakes, but sometimes there are other consequences that come with those mistakes. And what we want to do is spare our children some of the heartache of things that can't be reversed. And so we want to help them with their behavior. And books like this are very helpful. So now she has got married, Kate has got married, and she married the young man that she at first was not very well impressed with, didn't like him hardly at all. He finally declared that he loved her, and she said, "Oh, don't do that. I'm not interested." But later on, she started to appreciate him a lot more, and they did get married. And then she found out that her evenings would be spent quite alone, because he was so busy all the time. And I think that this is a good lesson too. I think that it's really good if you can grow up near and stay near your mother or a sister, because if your husband is busy or he has reasons to be gone even in the daytime, you'll have someone there. And so many people struck off on their own, and the husband was busy, or sometimes had to work away from home, and the women were left alone for a long time. And that's why it's so good to be multi-generational if you possibly can. Teach your children to stay near you, and if you want them to do that, plan on it. Try to find ways to buy or build places they can live that's near you, and encourage that, and don't just say it and then expect it to fall into place, but put your money where your mouth is. And so now I want to read from her diary from chapter, I'm not real sure about the history of this book, chapter 10, but it was written to help in the development of character. So she says, "Ernest has been gone a week." That's the name of her husband. "His mother is worse, and he had to go. I wanted to go too, but he said it was not worthwhile, as he should have to return directly. Dr. Emberley takes charge of his patients during his absence, and Mrs. E. and Auntie and the children come to see me very often. I like Mrs. Emberley more than ever before. She is not so audacious as I am, but I believe she agrees with me more than she will own." So then the next entry, February 25, Ernest writes that his mother is dangerously ill and seems in great distress, and I mean enough to want all of his love myself, while I should while he should give none to her. Poor Ernest, if she should die, he would be sadly afflicted. So then she writes about how her mother sends her a letter. A letter came from mother. She evidently misses me more than she will own. So here's this couple. They're separated from their parents and they miss them. Just as soon as Ernest returns home, I will ask him to let her come and live with us, and I'm sure he will. He loves her already, and now that his mother has gone, he will find real comfort, and I'm sure she will only make our home happier. So then the next one that I would read to you is about some of her disappointments, and of course it's good. It's good for people to read this. If you have young girls, you should read this. But never, ladies, never just hand a book like this to one of your children and say, read this. Take them through it and have them read it to you, like maybe one entry. And then let's make some observations about that entry, because you're going to learn right along with them. And you're going to say, let's see what we can see in this one entry, like January 31. How easy it is to make good resolutions and how easy it is to break them. And you can discuss that little sentence, and you can analyze it and learn and point to them at what the core of the matter is, because sometimes you hand this book to a young person and they'll read something and get their minds totally off balance on it, and you have to teach them how to focus on what it means. And if with any of this stuff, you don't just hand it, for instance, I like this movie, Princess Cut, but you don't just hand it to someone and say, oh, watch this. You're going to have to use it as a teaching tool. This is quite an interesting movie, and at first when I saw it, as I mentioned, I was kind of, surface and shallow, and I thought, oh, that's a cute movie. It's a really nice movie. It's a Christian movie. There's nothing bad in it. But as I watched it again and I took a lot of notes, I saw some things and I thought they must have really had a big session discussing what needed to be included in this message, Princess Cut. And it was about, so when you get this, you put it in, and then you sit with your notebook and you pause it every now and then to say, okay, what did he just say? What did she just say? And make some observations and use it as a teaching tool the way I'm doing it for you. Pause and observe everything, and you won't be able to do it all in one fell swoop. So I'm not sure how many minutes it is. Sometimes it will tell on here, but I don't see it. Looks like it's 2 hours. I'm not real sure. But you could divide it up into sections and watch it first, and then so I have some script notes which I have taken note of here, and I had said previously that I thought this would be the last time would be the last time that I would discuss this with you, but I got to thinking about another scene and I thought, oh my, how many times have I heard that? And they covered it. And there were two things. I mentioned the girlfriend of Grace, and she'd call her girlfriend and complain about something or confide something. And she said, I don't like how things are going with Jared, because I kind of don't tell my parents everything that he says or does, and it's not really going in the direction I want to go, because I want to get married. He hasn't said anything about that, and I don't like deceiving my parents about where we are, anything like that. And her girlfriend said, stop worrying about them. You can't be tied to them forever. Now, this started way back in the day, probably even before my time, where people mocked people who were close to their parents. And they'd say, oh, you're just, you can't be tied to them. You better think for yourself. But really, when someone says, think for yourself, what they're doing is they're thinking for you. So when someone says, well, why don't you think for yourself? Well, what do you want me to think? See, they want you to go in a certain direction. And you really aren't thinking for yourself ever, because we've got guides, Even if you read the Bible, you're not thinking for yourself. You're learning self-control based on what the Bible teaches, but everybody has something or someone or something that is a teacher for them. So when someone says, oh, you should just think for yourself, what they're saying is, I don't like the way you're doing it. Why don't you think the way I think? That's a telltale word. So when I heard her say, you can't be tied for them forever, how many times have you heard something like that? You can't be tied to them forever. You can't be always thinking about them. That's a cruel thing to say about parents those of you who have had children and they're so precious to you. Can you imagine, after what you've been through, the labor, the delivery, that precious child, and then staying up all night, sacrificing everything, and changing them and feeding them in the middle of the night, and just protecting them and watching them and all that, to have somebody say about you one day, well, you can't be tied to your mother forever. This is a very, very strong bonding that God has created. And so I recognized that, and I thought it was brilliant that they put that in there, because her girlfriend was so flippant about it all. She was so independent, and she said, stop caring about what they say. You can't be tied to them forever. But even after she was married, I noticed that her husband had said that her father had given them something for their anniversary or for the birthday of their child or something like that. And so they were still closely connected. So use this as a teaching tool and pause it and observe, and you'll learn along with it. Now, a lot of you will say, well, we didn't court that way, and we didn't follow all those things. And so I believe it would be hypocritical of us to introduce this to our children. But that's not true. As you learn to do something better, and you repent of the way that you did it before, it does not make you a hypocrite if you say that you don't want your children to do that. That makes you a good teacher. You've learned something, and now you're going to inform them. And so now I wanted to tell you a little thing that I observed in it, and I haven't watched it, but it just hit me in the head, because how many times have I heard this happening? In this film, Grace she finally, the pressure of things not going right for her and going on dates and stuff just really bothers her. And so her parents say, why don't you just give up dating? Don't look for a husband. Just come home and build a relationship with your family and your brothers, and let God find someone. And I honestly believe that, and the way that you can do that is to, first of all, commit your ways to God. And the Bible says, commit your ways to God, and He will bring you the desires of your heart, and have faith that it will happen that way. And you have to have that goal first. And so she agreed with them, and she said, okay, I will, but what am I going to do about Jared? And she said, I've tried telling him that, I don't like this relationship and I want to break it off, but he won't listen. And she said, well, I think you can figure that out. And sure enough, when she went to the library, and she got a whole lot of books on the different subjects that she wanted to cover. A lot of people are trying to help young people with their careers or with their religion, and it's good. And they give them books, and they give them advice, and they, help them with the way they're spending their money, and they help them with all kinds of things. They really need to be giving them as many courtship books as they possibly can read, so they can get a general idea of how this could work for them. They're not full of rules. They're just full of things that you can consider. And there were two of them I recognized when she had brought all those books home and thrown them on the bed and just totally sequestered herself and started reading them and taking notes and studying. And she stayed away from dating, stopped looking for a husband, stopped looking for a ring. And I saw a couple of those books that, and I tried to write down the titles of them. But when she came out of the library with all those books in her arms, right next door to the library apparently was the coffee shop where Jared worked, and he came out and he said, "Grace, how come you don't answer my calls?" And she said, "Well, we've been really busy." And he said, "Well, how come, why don't you ever contact me?" And she said, "Actually, I'm not interested in our relationship. It's not good for me, and we're just not right for each other, and I just I don't want to continue." And he said, "Well, why don't we go talk about it?" So here he is this is sales for you. Didn't accept the answer, so he said, "Let's go somewhere and talk about it." Because, he probably knew he could probably change her mind. And these are things you have to watch out for and teach your children. They'll say, "Well, let's go talk about it." And she said, "I don't want to talk about it. I can tell you right now. I'll tell you right here." And she said, "I don't want you to call me. I don't want anything. I don't want this relationship anymore because I want to get married." And he finally made one other attempt. As she was putting the books in the car, he grabbed one of them and he threw it back at her. He said, "Good luck with that." So in a final attempt to rescue his ambition of keeping her interested, he made a disparaging remark about the book. And he said, "Look, good luck with that." Well, I got to thinking about that because how many incidences that I had known over the years of someone who realized they were in a situation that was not good and wanted it to stop. And so they said, I'll just tell them." And they'll tell them, and then the person will say, "Oh, well, why don't we talk about it?" Or, "Why don't you come over and we'll talk about it?" Or they'll phone them and try to break it off, and they'll say, "Well, come on over and we'll talk about it." And so then the person comes back no more free than when they attempted to break it off. And I do know of several situations where this has just been the situation where one of them, either the boy or the girl, said, I will text her and see, I'll just text her and say, "I'm sorry, this isn't working, I'll have to break it off." And she will text back and say, "Well, that's too abrupt. Could we talk on the phone for a little bit?" So he'll tell his dad, "Well, she wanted me to talk on the phone because she thought it was too abrupt." So next thing you know, he's talking to her on the phone about it. He's still insisting, "I'm not interested." And so then she'll say, "Well, could you come over when my family's here and talk about it some more?" And so next thing you know, he's pulled right back into it. So I believe these might be sales tactics, when the customer doesn't want it, but you want them to have it, So just pay attention to that part where this Jared tries 3 different times to avoid the decision that Grace has made. And the 3rd time, he totally ridicules her. The first time, she says, I'll tell you right here. And then he tries to prolong it. "Well, why don't we go somewhere and talk about it, So ladies, that is one of the things that I observed in this Princess Cut. And I'm always hoping this will be the last time I talk about it, but I keep seeing more stuff. Even I haven't watched it in a while, I start remembering some things. They really covered a lot of things that I have actually seen happen. And so they were saying some of the same things, So pause and observe and see if you can find lessons in here and things that you have heard before. And it's always good to be prepared. And one of the things you can do if you're of a vital age is study things like this and this and this, and keep your mind keen and active and learn. You never know when you might need it, maybe not, I don't know. And another thing that you can do if you're of a vital age is to keep well. And the other day, it was early in the morning, and I somehow felt like I just needed a little bit more just rest, not sleep, but rest. And I just did not feel like hitting the day with activity. And I decided to go ahead and stay in bed a little bit longer. I was going to stay. I said, I'll just stay here and I'll read or I'll sleep and I'll rest until I actually feel better. It only took a couple of hours till I had recovered. And in the olden days, women used to go lay down. If they didn't quite feel well, they'd go lay down and they revived themselves. But I remember going to high school, the public school, in the 1950s and 60s, and where young women were told that they're no different than anybody else, and that they could work a full day and they don't have to rest. And it was sad in a way, because the women of my generation often came down with the illnesses and serious things that might not have happened had they gone at a more natural pace. And so if you're not feeling well, you can still be of great use to yourself and to others, because there's a lot of things you can do when you're resting. And so one of my favorite things, of course, is corresponding with my descendants and making up stories with them, which I'll tell you more about someday. And so, ladies, until I see you again, I hope you'll stay close to Christ. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for listening. I'm so glad you're here. And if you weren't here, I wouldn't be doing this. So, as I said before, you can leave a comment with me on my email, or you can leave it on the blog. There isn't anything here on the channel, but so I'll talk to you later. Bye.